Today, we are going to talk about Albert Einstein and his work. He was Nobel Prize winner scientist. Albert Einstein, born on March 14, 1879, Ulm, Württemberg, Germany, and died on April 18, 1955, Princeton, New Jersey, U.S., was a German-born physicist who developed the special and general theories of relativity and won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1921 for his explanation of the photoelectric effect. Einstein is generally considered the most influential physicist of the 20th century. Einstein's parents were secular, middle-class Jews. His father, Hermann Einstein, was originally a featherbed salesman and later ran an electrochemical factory with moderate success. His mother, the former Pauline Koch, ran the family household. He had one sister, Maria, who went by the name Maha, born 2 years after Albert. Einstein would write that two wonders deeply affected his early years. The first was his encounter with a compass at age 5. He was mystified that invisible forces could deflect the needle. This would lead to a lifelong fascination with invisible forces. The second wonder came at age 12 when he discovered a book of geometry, which he devoured, calling it his sacred little geometry book. Einstein became deeply religious at age 12, even composing several songs in praise of God and chanting religious songs on the way to school. This began to change, however, after he read science books that contradicted his religious beliefs. This challenge to established authority left a deep and lasting impression. At the Luitpold Gymnasium, Einstein often felt out of place and victimized by a Prussian-style educational system that seemed to stifle originality and creativity. One teacher even told him that he would never amount to anything. Yet another important influence on Einstein was a young medical student, Max Talmud, later Max Talmy, who often had dinner at the Einstein home. Talmud became an informal tutor, introducing Einstein to higher mathematics and philosophy. A pivotal turning point occurred when Einstein was 16 years old. Talmud had earlier introduced him to a children's science series by Aaron Bernstein, 1867 to 1868, popular books on physical science, in which the author imagined riding alongside electricity that was traveling inside a telegraph wire. Einstein then asked himself the question that would dominate his thinking for the next 10 years. What would a light beam look like if you could run alongside it? If light were a wave, then the light beam should appear stationary, like a frozen wave. Even as a child, though, he knew that stationary light waves had never been seen, so there was a paradox. Einstein also wrote his first scientific paper, at that time, the investigation of the state of ether in magnetic fields. Einstein's education was disrupted by his father's repeated failures at business. In 1894, after his company failed to get an important contract to electrify the city of Munich, Hermann Einstein moved to Milan to work with a relative. Einstein was left at a boarding house in Munich and expected to finish his education. Alone, miserable, and repelled by the looming prospect of military duty when he turned 16, Einstein ran away 6 months later and landed on the doorstep of his surprised parents. His parents realized the enormous problems that he faced as a school dropout and draft dodger with no employable skills. His prospects did not look promising. Fortunately, Einstein could apply directly to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic School in 1911. Following expansion in 1909 to full university status, it was renamed the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, in Zurich, without the equivalent of a high school diploma if he passed its stiff entrance examinations. His marks showed that he excelled in mathematics and physics, but he failed at French, chemistry, and biology. Because of his exceptional math scores, he was allowed into the Polytechnic on the condition that he first finish his formal schooling. He went to a special high school run by Jost Winteler in Aarau, Switzerland, and graduated in 1896. He also renounced his German citizenship at that time. He was stateless until 1901, when he was granted Swiss citizenship. He became lifelong friends with the Winteler family, with whom he had been boarding. Winteler's daughter, Marie, was Einstein's first love. Einstein's sister, Maha, would eventually marry Winteler's son Paul, and his close friend Michel Bessot would marry their eldest daughter, Anna. Einstein would recall that his years in Zurich were some of the happiest years of his life. He met many students who would become loyal friends, such as Marcel Grossmann, a mathematician, and Besso, with whom he enjoyed lengthy conversations about space and time. He also met his future wife, Mileva Maric, a fellow physics student from Serbia. After graduation in 1900, Einstein faced one of the greatest crises in his life. Because he studied advanced subjects on his own, he often cut classes. This earned him the animosity of some professors, especially Heinrich Weber. Unfortunately, Einstein asked Weber for a letter of recommendation. Einstein was subsequently turned down for every academic position that he applied to. Meanwhile, Einstein's relationship with Maric deepened, but his parents vehemently opposed the relationship. His mother especially objected to her Serbian background. Maric's family was Eastern Orthodox Christian. Einstein defied his parents, however, and in January 1902 he and Maric even had a child, Liesl, whose fate is unknown. It is commonly thought that she died of scarlet fever or was given up for adoption. In 1902 Einstein reached perhaps the lowest point in his life. He could not marry Maric and support a family without a job, and his father's business went bankrupt. Desperate and unemployed, Einstein took lowly jobs tutoring children, but he was fired from even these jobs. The turning point came later that year, when the father of his lifelong friend Marcel Grossmann was able to recommend him for a position as a clerk in the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. About then, Einstein's father became seriously ill and, just before he died, gave his blessing for his son to marry Maric. For years, Einstein would experience enormous sadness remembering that his father had died, thinking him a failure. With a small but steady income for the first time, Einstein felt confident enough to marry Maric, which he did on January 6, 1903. Their children, Hans Albert and Eduard, were born in Bern in 1904 and 1910, respectively. In hindsight, Einstein's job at the patent office was a blessing. He would quickly finish analyzing patent applications, leaving him time to daydream about the vision that had obsessed him since he was 16. What would happen if you raced alongside a light beam? While at the Polytechnic school he had studied Maxwell's equations, which describe the nature of light, and discovered a fact unknown to James Clerk Maxwell himself, namely, that the speed of light remains the same no matter how fast one moves. This violates Newton's laws of motion, however, because there is no absolute velocity in Isaac Newton's theory. This insight led Einstein to formulate the principle of relativity. The speed of light is a constant in any inertial frame, constantly moving frame. During 1905, often called Einstein's miracle year, he published 4 papers in the Annalen der Physik, each of which would alter the course of modern physics. Einstein also submitted a paper in 1905 for his doctorate. Other scientists, especially Henri Poincaré and Hendrik Lorentz, had pieces of the theory of special relativity, but Einstein was the first to assemble the whole theory together and to realize that it was a universal law of nature, not a curious figment of motion in the ether, as Poincaré and Lorentz had thought. In one private letter to Mileva, Einstein referred to our theory, which has led some to speculate that she was a co-founder of relativity theory. However, Mileva had abandoned physics after twice failing her graduate exams, and there is no record of her involvement in developing relativity. In fact, in his 1905 paper, Einstein only credits his conversations with Besso in developing relativity. In the 19th century there were 2 pillars of physics: Newton's laws of motion and Maxwell's theory of light. Einstein was alone in realizing that they were in contradiction and that one of them must fall. At first Einstein's 1905 papers were ignored by the physics community. This began to change after he received the attention of just one physicist, perhaps the most influential physicist of his generation, Max Planck, the founder of the quantum theory. Soon, owing to Planck's laudatory comments and to experiments that gradually confirmed his theories, Einstein was invited to lecture at international meetings, such as the Solvay conferences, and he rose rapidly in the academic world. He was offered a series of positions at increasingly prestigious institutions, including the University of Zurich, the University of Prague, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, and finally the University of Berlin, where he served as director of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physics from 1913 to 1933, although the opening of the institute was delayed until 1917. Even as his fame spread, Einstein's marriage was falling apart. He was constantly on the road, speaking at international conferences, and lost in contemplation of relativity. The couple argued frequently about their children and their meager finances. Convinced that his marriage was doomed, Einstein began an affair with a cousin, Elsa Lowenthal, whom he later married. Elsa was a first cousin on his mother's side and a second cousin on his father's side. When he finally divorced Mileva in 1919, he agreed to give her the money he might receive if he ever won a Nobel Prize. One of the deep thoughts that consumed Einstein from 1905 to 1915 was a crucial flaw in his own theory: it made no mention of gravitation or acceleration. His friend Paul Ehrenfest had noticed a curious fact. If a disk is spinning, its rim travels faster than its center, and hence by special relativity, meter sticks placed on its circumference should shrink. This meant that Euclidean plane geometry must fail for the disk. For the next 10 years, Einstein would be absorbed with formulating a theory of gravity in terms of the curvature of space-time. To Einstein, Newton's gravitational force was actually a byproduct of a deeper reality: the bending of the fabric of space and time. In November 1915, Einstein finally completed the general theory of relativity, which he considered to be his masterpiece. In the summer of 1915, Einstein had given 6 two-hour lectures at the University of Göttingen that thoroughly explained an incomplete version of general relativity that lacked a few necessary mathematical details. Much to Einstein's consternation, the mathematician David Hilbert, who had organized the lectures at his university and had been corresponding with Einstein, then completed these details and submitted a paper in November on general relativity just 5 days before Einstein, as if the theory were his own. Later they patched up their differences and remained friends. Today physicists refer to the action from which the equations are derived as the Einstein-Hilbert action, but the theory itself is attributed solely to Einstein. Einstein was convinced that general relativity was correct because of its mathematical beauty and because it accurately predicted the precession of the perihelion of Mercury's orbit around the Sun. His theory also predicted a measurable deflection of light around the Sun. As a consequence, he even offered to help fund an expedition to measure the deflection of starlight during an eclipse of the Sun.